Welcome to Creepy Whispers. I'm Jack Thompson, and here we'll explore stories that will send chills down your spine. Get ready to dive into the unknown, where each whisper hides a secret. First story. I need to share something bizarre that happened to me last week. I'm still trying to understand what went down. I was visiting my family in the countryside and decided to drive to save some money. I left work late and ended up hitting the road at night. Everything was fine until I started getting sleepy. You know when you're driving and suddenly realize you've had your eyes closed for a few seconds. Yeah, it was intense. I decided it was better to stop somewhere to rest before I caused an accident. I checked my GPS and saw there was a motel a few kilometers ahead. It wasn't exactly what I wanted, but at that point, any bed would do. I arrived at this motel around a.m. The place was quite far from the road and had a kind of rundown appearance, you know. Flickering lights, peeling paint, that sort of thing. But I was so tired, I didn't care. I parked the car and went to the reception. There was a sleepy-looking guy behind the counter. He looked at me weird when I asked for a room just for myself, but he didn't say anything. I got the key and went to the room. When I opened the door, I almost ran back to the car. The smell of mold was overwhelming, and I could see suspicious stains on the carpet. But I was dead tired and thought, it's just for one night. It'll be better than sleeping in the car. Little did I know what was coming. I dropped my backpack on the floor and threw myself on the bed. I didn't even bother taking off my shoes. I just wanted to close my eyes and sleep. But that's when the weirdness started. I don't know how much time had passed, but I suddenly woke up to a strange noise. You know that sound of something being dragged? That's exactly what I was hearing. At first, I thought it was just someone in the next room moving furniture at a.m., go figure. But the sound seemed to be coming from inside my own room. I was paralyzed in bed, afraid to even breathe. The noise continued for a few minutes and then stopped. I lay there, motionless, trying to understand what had happened. When I finally got the courage to get up and turn on the light, I almost had a heart attack. The closet door, which I was sure was closed when I arrived, was now ajar. I stood looking at it for a while, not knowing what to do. Part of me wanted to pretend I hadn't seen anything, go back to bed, and wait for daylight. But curiosity got the better of me. With my heart in my throat, I went to the closet and opened the door slowly. What I saw inside left me in shock. There was a pile of suitcases and backpacks of all types and sizes. Some looked new, others well used. I opened one of them and found women's clothes, toiletries, even a wallet. Man, this definitely wasn't forgotten luggage from old guests. Someone was using that room to hide stolen goods. I stood there, looking at all those suitcases, not knowing what to do. My mind was racing. Should I call the police? But what if the thief was still around? What if the guy at the reception was involved? I started to break out in a cold sweat just thinking about the possibilities. That's when I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. One of the suitcases had a tag with the name Maria Silva. That name stuck in my head. I was sure I had heard it somewhere before. After a few seconds, it hit me. Maria Silva was the name of a woman who had disappeared a few weeks ago. I had seen the news on TV. My God, had I just found the clue the police were looking for? At that moment, I heard footsteps in the hallway. My heart raced. Quickly, I closed the closet and went back to bed, pretending to be asleep. The footsteps stopped in front of my door. I kept my eyes half closed, trying to see something through the crack under the door. I saw a shadow standing there. The doorknob started to turn slowly. Man, I've never felt so scared in my life. I closed my eyes tight and pretended to be in a deep sleep. I heard the door open and someone enter the room. I tried to control my breathing to appear truly asleep. The person stood still for a while, as if observing me. Then I heard footsteps heading towards the closet. The sound of doors opening, things being moved. I just kept thinking, please don't notice I messed with the suitcases, please. I lay there, pretending to sleep, for what seemed like an eternity. I could hear the sound of zippers being opened, things being rummaged through in the closet. My heart was beating so fast, I thought the person would hear it. Suddenly, the noise stopped. I felt the person's gaze on me again. That's when I heard a low sigh and the footsteps moving away. The door closed with a soft click. I waited a few more minutes before daring to open my eyes. When I finally looked, the room was empty. I got up slowly, legs shaking, and went to the closet. I opened the door and saw that some suitcases were missing, including Maria Silva's. I couldn't stay in that place any longer. I grabbed my things as quickly and silently as possible. Every little noise made me freeze, thinking the guy would come back. I opened the room door very slowly and peeked into the hallway. Empty. I tiptoed out, trying not to make any noise. When I got to the reception, there was no one there. I dropped the key on the counter and ran to my car. It was only when I got in and locked the doors that I could breathe. I started the engine and got out of there as fast as I could. I drove for hours non-stop until I reached my family's house. The sun was already rising when I parked in front of their house. I sat there for a while, trying to process everything that had happened. Should I have called the police? Had I imagined it all? I spent the rest of the day kind of spaced out. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. My family even asked if everything was okay, but I just said I was tired from the trip. At night, I couldn't take it anymore and decided to research the Maria Silva case. I found a recent article saying she had disappeared during a car trip, right in the region where I had stopped. Her photo made my stomach churn. It was the same woman from the ID I had seen in the suitcase. I spent hours reading about the case, about other people who had disappeared in the same area. I started connecting the dots and realized that motel could be the center of something much bigger and more sinister than I had imagined. I couldn't sleep well that night or the following ones. I kept thinking if I should tell someone, if I should go to the police. But what if the motel guy recognized me? What if he was part of a bigger scheme and came after me? I had no concrete evidence, just my word. Who would believe me? I ended up not telling anyone, but this story won't leave my head. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night thinking I hear that sound of things being dragged. I keep wondering what happened to Maria Silva and the other people who owned those suitcases. Are they still alive? Could I have done something to help? This guilt eats away at me, but at the same time, I'm afraid of what might happen if I tell. A few weeks have passed since that night at the motel, and I still can't get this story out of my head. I've gone back to my routine to work, but I'm not the same. I keep looking over my shoulder all the time, afraid of seeing someone following me. I avoid traveling by car, and when I need to, I never stop at motels or isolated places anymore. I have frequent nightmares about that room, the suitcases, faces of people I've never seen but imagined to be the owners of those bags. The worst thing is the feeling of helplessness. I know I should do something, tell someone, but fear paralyzes me. What if I'm overreacting? What if it's just a coincidence? But then I remember Maria Silva's name, her photo in the newspaper, and I know I can't be imagining all this. Sometimes I think about creating an anonymous profile and posting this story on some mystery forum on the internet, just to get this weight off my chest. But then I wonder if that could make things worse. What if the motel guy or whoever is involved in this sees the post and recognizes me somehow? This experience has completely changed my worldview. Now, whenever I hear news about missing people, I can't help but think about that night. I wonder how many other places like that motel exist out there, hiding terrible secrets. I wish I could go back in time and do things differently, maybe have had the courage to call the police right away. But now it seems too late. All I can do is live with this doubt, this fear, and this guilt, and hope that one day, somehow, the truth will come out and the people involved in this macabre scheme will be punished. Meanwhile, I continue living with this secret, always looking over my shoulder and wondering if I'll ever be able to forget what I saw that night at the motel. Second story. I still can't believe what happened to me last week. I'm here trying to piece together this crazy story in my head. It all started when I had to leave home in a hurry because of a huge leak that appeared out of nowhere in my bedroom wall. The building manager said it would take a few days to fix, and I had nowhere to go. I ended up finding a cheap hotel in a sketchy area of town, you know. One of those places where you look at it and think, oh man, better not, but I was broke and out of options, so I went for it anyway. I arrived around 8 at night. The place looked like it came straight out of an 80 seconds horror movie, all dark and run down. The receptionist was a weird guy, huge dark circles under his eyes and a kind of lost look. He kept staring at me for ages while I was checking in, as if there was something wrong with me. I got the room key and went up the stairs because the elevator had an out-of-order sign. The hallway was completely silent. It didn't even seem like there were other guests. I confess I started to get a sinking feeling in my stomach, you know? That sensation that something's wrong, but you can't explain what. I entered the room and my God, what a depressing place. The paint was peeling, there were strange stains on the ceiling, and a musty smell you couldn't ignore. I threw my backpack on the bed and went straight to the bathroom. I needed a shower to relax after the tense day. But guess what? The water came out cold and with minimal pressure. I spent a good few minutes trying to wash properly in that horrible shower. When I came out, I heard strange noises coming from the hallway. It sounded like someone was dragging something heavy. I got curious and went to the door to take a peek through the keyhole. That's when I saw this really weird guy passing by. He was tall, thin, and wearing a black coat, even though it was really hot. The strangest thing was that he was dragging a huge suitcase, one of those really old ones. The noise the suitcase made on the floor was super irritating. He stopped right in front of my room and stared at the door for a few seconds. I swear I felt my heart freeze at that moment. I stood still, not making a sound, praying he wouldn't notice I was there. After what seemed like an eternity, he continued walking. I breathed a sigh of relief, but that scene kept hammering in my head. After that, I couldn't relax anymore. I kept pacing back and forth in the room, checking the door every 5 minutes. I tried to turn on the TV to distract myself, but it only picked up static-filled channels. I ended up lying on the bed, which was hard as a rock, and staring at the ceiling. I don't know how much time passed, but at some point, I must have dozed off. I woke up startled by some knocking on the door. I looked at the clock. It was 2:37 in the morning. My heart started racing immediately. Who the hell would be knocking on my door at that hour? I stayed quiet, hoping the person would go away. But the knocking continued, getting louder and louder. Suddenly, I heard a voice, "Room service. Room service." At that hour, in this run-down hotel? No way that was normal. I remained silent, praying for the person to give up. But then, I heard a noise in the lock. Someone was trying to open the door. I panicked. I jumped out of bed and ran to the bathroom, looking for something to defend myself with. I only found an old toothbrush. I came back to the room just as the door opened. And guess who came in? The weird guy from the hallway, the one with the suitcase. The guy entered the room like he owned the place. I stood there paralyzed, holding that ridiculous toothbrush, not knowing what to do. He looked me up and down and gave me a smile that sent chills down my spine. "Good evening, friend. Sorry to bother you so late, but I need your help," he said in an eerily calm voice. I tried to say something, but my mouth was too dry. That's when he pulled a gun out of his coat pocket. My God, I've never felt so scared in my life. My legs went weak. I thought I was going to faint right there. "Let's do this," he continued, pointing the gun at me. "You're going to give me everything valuable you have here, and we'll resolve this nicely, okay?" I could only nod in agreement. With trembling hands, I started grabbing my wallet, cell phone, watch, everything of value I had. The guy kept throwing everything into that huge suitcase he was carrying. Meanwhile, I was trying to think of some way to call for help, but I was so terrified that I couldn't think straight. The worst part was that I knew that even if I screamed, probably no one would come to help me in that ghost hotel. After I handed everything over, I thought the nightmare was over. But the guy didn't leave the room. He stood there, staring at me with those cold eyes. "You know," he said, "you've been very cooperative. I think I'll give you a gift." My heart almost stopped. What kind of gift would an armed robber give? He opened the suitcase and pulled out a brown envelope. "This here," he said, waving the envelope, "is the key to understanding what's happening in this hotel. But be careful. Knowledge is a double-edged sword." He threw the envelope on the bed and left the room, locking the door from the outside. I stood there for a good few minutes, trying to process what had happened. When I finally managed to move, I ran to the door. It was indeed locked. I yelled for help, banged on the door until my hands hurt, but no one came. It was as if the entire hotel had disappeared. I went back to the bed and looked at the envelope. Part of me wanted to open it, to find out what the hell was going on. But another part was terrified of what might be inside. I ended up picking up the envelope with trembling hands. When I opened it, I found a bunch of old photos of the hotel and newspaper clippings. The headlines talked about mysterious disappearances, all at this same hotel. I spent the rest of the night analyzing those photos and clippings. The more I read, the more scared I became. The stories were bizarre. Guests who vanished without a trace, employees who suddenly went crazy, reports of strange noises in the corridors. And the worst part, all of this had been happening for decades. I couldn't understand how a place like this was still operating. In one of the oldest photos, I recognized the guy who had robbed me. He was there, looking exactly the same, in a photo from 1978. How was that possible? My mind was racing, trying to find some logical explanation for all of this. When the sun started to rise, I heard the sound of the door being unlocked. I ran there, desperate to get out of that room. But when I opened the door, the hallway was completely different. The walls, previously peeling and dirty, were now perfectly painted. The old carpet had been replaced by a shiny wooden floor. It was as if I had entered another hotel during the night. I ran down the stairs and found myself facing a completely modern reception, nothing like the run-down place where I had checked in. The receptionist, a smiling young man, looked at me confused when I asked him to call the police. "Police? Why, sir? Did something happen?" he asked, as if I were crazy. I left that hotel completely disoriented. On the street, everything seemed normal, but I couldn't understand what had happened. I went straight to a police station, but when I told my story, the officers looked at me as if I had lost my mind. They even went to the hotel, but of course, they found nothing suspicious. The manager showed the security camera footage, and at no point did it show anyone entering my room during the night. It was as if that entire bizarre experience had never happened. I went home feeling like an idiot, thinking that maybe I had dreamed it all or, I don't know, had some kind of hallucination. But then, a few days later, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a photo of me sleeping in that hotel room. On the back of the photo, a handwritten message: "Welcome to the Hotel of Alternate Realities. Your stay was a success. We hope to see you again soon." I froze on the spot. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't madness. It really happened. Since then, I can't stop thinking about it. I keep wondering if there are other places like this, other realities mixing with ours. And the worst part, I'm afraid that one day, without realizing it, I might end up in another one of these places and not be able to come back. If you're reading this, be careful. Sometimes the cheap hotel you choose might be the gateway to something you can't even imagine exists. Third story, to this day, I'm still baffled when I think about what happened to me on that business trip to Miami. I'm sharing this here because I need to get it off my chest, and maybe someone can help me understand this craziness. It was supposed to be just another boring business trip, you know? I've been working at an insurance company for years, always in the same rhythm. Then, out of nowhere, the boss calls me and says I was chosen to represent the company at an event in Miami. I was so excited. It was my first time in the United States. I packed my bags in a blink of an eye and was at the airport before I could even process what was happening. I arrived in Miami on a Wednesday afternoon. The heat was killer, but I was radiant. The hotel was much fancier than I imagined, with an ocean view and everything. I barely had time to unpack before I had to meet Mike, my colleague who was also sent by the company. We decided to take a walk around the city before the event's welcome dinner. Miami is crazy, folks. The colors, the beaches, the cars. Everything seemed like it was out of a movie. Night fell, and we went to the dinner. Good food, boring business talk. After about 2 hours of enduring conversations about insurance and the financial market, Mike and I looked at each other. It was time to experience Miami's real nightlife. After dinner, Mike and I decided to go to a bar a few blocks from the hotel. The place was lively, with loud music and lots of people dancing. We ordered some beers and talked about how different it was from everything we were used to in Brazil. That's when I saw her. A beautiful woman in a red dress, sitting alone at the bar. Our eyes met, and she smiled at me. I felt my heart race immediately. I looked at Mike, who gave me that mischievous smile and encouraged me to go talk to her. With shaky legs, I approached and started a conversation. Her name was Sophia, and she had an accent I couldn't quite place. The conversation flowed so well that I lost track of time. Sophia was fun, mysterious, and seemed genuinely interested in me. After about 2 hours of chatting and a few drinks, she suggested we go to her room at a nearby hotel. I hesitated for a second, thinking about work the next day, but the adrenaline and excitement spoke louder. I told Mike I was leaving and walked out of the bar hand in hand with Sophia, feeling like the luckiest guy in the world. We arrived at Sophia's hotel in a few minutes. It was a simpler place than mine, but I didn't care about that. In the elevator, she kissed me in a way that left me breathless. We rushed into the room, barely able to keep our hands off each other. Sophia threw her bag in a corner and started taking off my jacket. I was completely caught up in the moment, forgetting everything around me. That's when I heard a sound that froze my blood, the sound of a door opening. Before I could process what was happening, a tall, muscular man entered the room. His look was pure hatred, and in his right hand, he held a gun. My heart almost stopped. The guy started yelling in a language I didn't understand, pointing the gun at me, then at Sophia. She screamed back, seeming scared, but something in her eyes made me suspicious. It was as if there was a touch of acting. I didn't have much time to think about it. The armed man lunged at me, and I, acting on pure instinct, threw myself to the side, narrowly escaping being grabbed. In a quick and desperate move, I managed to sneak into the bathroom and lock the door. My heart was beating so hard, I thought I was going to have a heart attack right there. The screams continued on the other side, and I heard sounds of things being broken. I looked around for a way out and saw a small window. Without thinking twice, I opened it and forced myself through. I only stopped when I couldn't take it anymore, panting and sweating, on a street I had no idea where it was. It was only then that I began to assess the situation. My ankle was throbbing. I was all dirty and disheveled. And worst of all, I realized my wallet was no longer in my pocket. I panicked. Everything I had, money, cards, documents, had been left in that room. It started to sink in. Could all of that have been a setup? Had I fallen for a scam so well orchestrated that it didn't even seem real? Completely lost and not knowing what to do, I started wandering aimlessly through the streets of Miami. My phone had also been left in the room, so I had no way to call anyone or use GPS. I passed by some bars and restaurants that were still open, but I felt too embarrassed to ask for help. People looked at me strangely, and I didn't blame them. I must have looked like a madman. After walking for almost an hour, I finally recognized an avenue that led to my hotel. I'd never felt so relieved in my life. I arrived at the hotel around 4 in the morning, completely exhausted and still in shock. The receptionist looked me up and down with an expression of astonishment. I explained that I had lost my key, which wasn't untrue, and, after confirming my identity, he gave me a new one. As soon as I entered the room, I collapsed on the bed. My head was spinning trying to understand what had happened. How could I have been so naive? How did I not realize it was a setup? And worst of all, how was I going to explain this to the company? I spent hours tossing and turning in bed, unable to sleep, reliving every detail of that crazy night. When the sun began to rise, I was still awake, with huge dark circles under my eyes and a terrible headache. I had to call Mike and tell him everything. He was shocked, but helped me cancel the cards and contact the embassy to get temporary documents. The rest of the day was a blur of calls, embarrassing explanations, and frustrated attempts to remember more details that could help the police. I ended up missing the company event, which only made the situation worse. My boss was furious when he found out, and I knew I would have serious problems when I returned to Brazil. The strangest thing of all is that, after that night, I never heard from Sophia or the armed guy again. It was as if they had disappeared into thin air. The police investigated but found nothing conclusive. Sometimes I find myself wondering if it really happened the way I remember, or if my mind played some trick on me. Months have passed since that trip, and I still wake up in the middle of the night, in a cold sweat, reliving those moments of terror. Every time I remember, I feel a mix of shame and fear. It was an experience that completely changed the way I see things. Today, I'm much more cautious in everything I do, especially when traveling. That night in Miami taught me in the worst possible way that not everything is what it seems, and that a moment of excitement can cost you dearly.